Start. Good afternoon. Welcome. It's good to see everybody, some friends and colleagues and some students. It's really a pleasure for us to have Jonathan Kuttab with us. I know those who are in the law school have been dealing with considerable issues that are here relative to Palestine and how Palestine is situated, but it is not disconnected from what is occurring in Palestine today. Yesterday, there were 5 Palestinians, young men, that were killed in my hometown in the city of Nablus. The whole city is under lockdown for the past 14 days. So when we speak about Palestinian civil society and the targeting of journalists and lawyers and Israel war on civil society, it is something that is not separate and distinct. It's not over there, but has continuity here on our own campus and also across the country. 23 different states have legislation to actually criminalize and target those who are active on the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanction. And the interesting part of it is that the states that target BDS are at ease of also calling for the boycott of Ben and Jerry's simultaneously. So speaking from both sides, or at least 4 sides of one's mouth, is a norm in this sense when it comes to the contradiction relative to the treatment in dealing with Israel. But that's not the discussion today. It's rather for me to introduce our guest. Jonathan Kuttab is a co-founder of the Palestinian human rights group Al-Haq, one of the oldest organizations in the Palestinian human rights landscape. Also a co-founder of Nonviolence International. Again, for those who are familiar with Palestinian resistance, there was a long tradition of nonviolence in the Palestinian context, whether resisting paying taxes, resisting paying your bills, and so on, and also engaging in a whole series of boycotts, whether it's the 1987 Intifada or the 2000, or even much earlier than that. He's a well-known international human rights attorney, and he practices in the US, Palestine, and Israel. So he's actually can take cases in the US, in Palestine, in terms of the West Bank, and Israel, and he will speak possibly some on that. Jonathan is also the executive director of Friends of Sabeel North America, also a co-sponsor of this event. Sabeel of North America is really a tremendous organization that works closely with the Christian Palestinian community and to try to highlight Kairos Palestina, which is really the statement that came out from the churches in Palestine relative to commitment to highlighting apartheid as well as PDS and so on. So he is the executive director of Friends of Sabeel North America, serves on the board of Bethlehem Bible College, and is president of the board of Holy Land Trust. He's the co-founder and board member of Just Peace Advocates. He was also the head of the legal committee negotiating the Cairo Agreement of 1994 between Israel and the PLO. So without further ado, please help me welcome Jonathan Kuttab to UC Berkeley.
Thank you, and welcome to all of you. I understand there's been a lot of controversy recently around this issue. I think some of you here are quite committed to the cause of Palestine and Palestinian nationalism, and some of you are quite committed to Zionism and the idea of making Israel a state as Jewish as France is French. You are welcome. You will be treated with respect and dignity because we are caught up in a situation where we are in this together. I will be saying some things that may be difficult for you to hear, both if you support Palestinians and if you support Zionism. Please hear me out, and I will welcome questions, discussions, and comments at the end of my talk. Because you see, we have to be frank with each other. For almost 100 years now, these two movements, Zionism, the idea that we must take this land and make it as Jewish as France is French, and Palestinian nationalism, which says, Palestine Arabiya, this is ours, it's about the Arab world. Who are all these foreigners coming in to take part of our land? These two movements have been at each other's throats in a zero-sum situation, where every additional dunam of land that is taken from one side is lost to the other. Every additional immigrant that comes in or child that is born is seen as influencing the demographic balance, and therefore is either a loss or a gain to the other. In 1967, many people thought that there was an opportunity for a pragmatic solution, because Israel captured basically all of Palestine and announced to the world that we have no territorial ambition. We didn't start, well, we started this war preemptively because we thought the other side was going to hit us first. So we have no territorial ambitions. We'd gladly give up that territory in return for Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims recognizing Israel within its 67 borders. And so the idea of a two-state solution came up, and in fact became enshrined in international law, which, by the way, prohibits annexing territory taken during war, defensive or otherwise. Somebody should tell Putin, somebody should tell our former president. But that was basically the outline of a pragmatic solution. Unfortunately, while a lot of people said they were interested in such a compromise, some people thought it was never really seriously offered, and some people thought that it was unfair to begin with, giving Palestinians only 22% of Palestine while giving Jewish Zionists all of the land. Never mind, people thought it may work. And a lot of good people of good conscience put their energy behind this compromise. I was one of them, I admit. I worked for a two-state solution quite hard, even before it became the accepted position of the PLO and the Arab Leagues through the Saudi initiative and the United Nations. The problem is that the Zionist movement started implementing and implanting in the 22% that was supposed to be an Arab state, exclusively Jewish states, Jewish settlements. Now, these were not Israeli settlements, because Israeli Arabs couldn't go and live there, citizens of the state of Israel. These were only for Jews. These were the purest form of Zionism. Take as much land as you can, inhabit it and populate it with Jews and Jews alone, and set up structures for them so that they will stay there permanently. Over the last 50 years, while the rest of us were busy thinking that maybe there is a two-state solution happening, over 700,000 Jews settled in the occupied territories. Not only that, they were linked to one another and to Israel by a network of roads that are exclusively Jewish, only for Jews. Talk about territory that's Jew-free. Well, these were Arab-free roads. Settlers lived under a separate system of laws. They had separate courts. They had separate police. They had separate educational, health, social welfare, and security arrangement that served Jews and Jews only, while the Palestinians remaining in that area were under military government. In 1994, the Palestinian Authority was created, the Oslo Agreement, and as I said, I bear part of the responsibility and the guilt for that debacle. And part of that agreement was that the West Bank would be divided into areas A, B, and C, with A being the most densely populated, to expand slowly into B and C and eventually become a Palestinian state. That's what we were told, and we believed it. Now, 50 years after the beginning of the occupation, things have become crystal clear. There will be no two-state solution. For those of us who hoped for a Palestinian state, I have some difficult news for you. There's not going to be a Palestinian state. It's not. Even negotiations towards it, there are no more negotiations. No more talk with Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is now required to play a security subcontractor and keep his people under control on behalf of the Israeli occupation. The other side, the Zionist side, now feels that the battle has been won. There's nothing more to talk about. We have it all. In fact, Ian Lustig wrote a very powerful, long academic article where he analyzed the Jewish right-wing publication called Ribbonout, Sovereignty, where he said the settlers no longer feel they have to fight the battle against annexation. In fact, they don't want annexation, because annexation gives land to the Jewish state rather than to the Jewish people. For them, what is important is Ribbonout. Jews have to be in control of the land, not only in the West Bank, but also in Israel itself. So a whole slew of laws were created to make it very clear that this is a Jewish state for the Jews and only for the Jews. That yes, Israeli Arabs have the vote to the Knesset, but we'll make sure that that is an empty hope, because it is a Jewish state and it's the state of the Jews. And people like Ben Gvir, who used to openly call for mass transfer, are now acceptable in Israeli society. The predictions are he'll probably get 13 or 14 Knesset seats and be the third largest party in Israel. The Labour Party, I don't know if they'll even make the threshold. They're number 6 or 7. But Israelis have a problem too, because their system of managing the conflict is running into problems. As long as Palestinians could expect that maybe if we work hard and if we're really good and if we try to play our cards right and with the right elections in the United States and in Israel and the European community, etc., we may have a state. That has gone by the wayside. And ordinary Palestinian youth now have no hope at all. Ordinary Israeli Zionists also have no hope at all because they realize that having gotten what they wanted, they are left with an apartheid state that is acknowledged increasingly to be an apartheid state. If it's going to be a Jewish state, it's going to be for the Jews. And the non-Jews cannot have equality or equal rights in this state. As this became more and more apparent, it became harder and harder to manage the population. It is not an accident that we are now seeing more and more killing of Palestinians who are younger and younger. We have over 800 Palestinians from the West Bank today under administrative detention, which means no charges, no trial, we just put you away for 6 months, renewable. The Israelis also realized that they must revive a number of practices that for a while they were not using, including targeted killings and assassinations. There is a book by Ronen Bergman called The Secret History of Israel's Targeted Assassinations, which describes the thought process behind choosing and executing targeted assassinations. We saw that recently with Shireen Abu Akleh. That was a case of a clear targeted assassination. Don't listen to me, don't listen to the international reports that were made. The New York Times itself, hardly a friend of the Palestinian people, did their own professional and forensic study, and they concluded that this was a deliberate targeted killing. And Haaretz says this is now the new policy, with killing one Palestinian in Nablus from the lion's den by booby-trapping his motorcycle, and by the other operation where 4 or 5 were targeted and killed. This is now the new standard policy. And we will see more and more of it, I'm sorry to say. Also, the problem of presenting the world with an apartheid regime that on its face is apartheid is a problem. So you have to squeeze international and local human rights organizations. It's not an accident that Al-Haq and 6 others were labeled terrorist organizations. We've been around for 40 years. And they've always said, you guys are terrorists, you're a mouthpiece for the PLO when the PLO was the terrorist body. But now they really realize they have to do something to shut us up. Shut up journalists, shut up human rights organizations, and shut up civil society, because the Palestinian Authority can no longer play the role of speaking on behalf of the Palestinian people anymore. It's failed in playing that role. I submit to you that we need some new out-of-the-box thinking. And it's painful. It's painful for me as a Palestinian to somehow deal with and accept the fact that 7 million Zionist Jews are living in my homeland and consider it their homeland, and they're going nowhere. Period. I have to accept it. But it's also painful for Israeli Zionists to realize that with every possible advantage in the world on their side, with control of the entire territory, and the air above it, and the ground underneath it, and the shoreline, and all points of entry and exit, with a powerful military, with nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, planes, artillery, tanks, boats, gunboats, submarines, with an arms industry that exports, number 6 in the world in exports. And on top of that, with the support of the world's only superpower, they have failed. We are going nowhere. They have failed to crush our spirits. We haven't gotten the memo yet. We don't feel defeated. We feel this is our homeland, and we will stay in it, and we will resist against horrendous odds, but we will be there and we will live there. Now, the issue of apartheid becomes really serious at this point because apartheid today is a well-defined legal concept. There is a convention on apartheid and discrimination, and there is the ICC, International Criminal Court, the Statute of Rome, that describes the crime of apartheid in its elements. Those of you who are lawyers or in law school know that every crime has to have elements, and you have to have all the elements of the crime for there to be a crime. So when we say that Israel is an apartheid state, we're not being pejorative. We're not cursing them. We're not saying they're like South Africa. In fact, in many ways, it's unfair to compare them to South Africa. In some ways, they are worse. The elements of the crime of apartheid are 3. First, there has to be domination by one group over other groups. Jews want to dominate the land of Palestine. They want to dominate the Arabs, whether they are Christians or Muslims. They're very clear about that. It's a Jewish state. This is what we want to do. Second, the system of domination has to be implemented through laws and regulations. This is not just, I don't like Arabs. I don't want them to marry my daughter. This is laws on the books that determine where you live, what you do, what rights you have and don't have, as a matter of law, if you are Jewish, as opposed if you are a non-Jewish person. Third element, there have to be inhuman and inhumane practices, including, and they're listed, torture, deportation, collective punishment, restrictions on movement, and restriction on organization. They're listed in the law. So when we say this is an apartheid regime, we're just describing what is, in fact, in Israeli law. But I don't want to end on a totally negative tone. I, personally, being a person who has been committed to peace and nonviolence and coexistence, with justice, mind you, not acceptance, I have thought that maybe these two movements of Palestinian Arab nationalism and of Jewish Zionism have failed their constituency. and they need to change radically in a way that incorporates and accommodates the other group, which has hitherto been their existential death threat and enemy. I said we can create a new state that is both Jewish and Arab, that gives Palestinian Arabs everything they want: the right of return, freedom of movement in all of Palestine, equality, and a thriving Arab-Palestinian culture, everything that a state promises to them except for exclusivity. It'll be a Palestinian Arab state, but it'll also be a Jewish state. And it'll also give the Jewish Zionists everything that Zionism promises them. You can have a Jewish state, right of return. You can thrive, you can have security, you can have Jewish holidays, you can have this, but you can't have exclusivity. This is your home, yes, but it's also the home of somebody else. Now, when I wrote up this idea, by the way, the book is available. You can download it from Amazon, or you can download it for free if you want an electronic version from Nonviolence International. It's called Beyond the Two-State Solution. When I wrote this book, I said, this is a vision. This is what we want to aspire to. And there is no reason why we cannot have it. I spoke to a rabbi in New Jersey once. I said, Rabbi, why do you want a Jewish state? What's a Jewish state? How can a state be Jewish? You can't circumcise a piece of rock. He thought about it and he said, I want, after everything that's happened to us, I want a state where any Jew, anywhere, anytime, no questions asked, can go and live and be able to defend himself. I said, I can give you something better. How about a state where any Jew, anywhere, anytime, no questions asked, can go and live, but he doesn't need to defend himself because nobody is out to get him. Because he's not taking somebody else's land and water resources. Because he is not claiming it exclusively. He said, is that possible? I said, yeah, it's possible. It's not easy. There are some obstacles that have to be met. And there are some major issues that need to be dealt with. One of the first is what I call the demographic demon. He says, what happens when the Arabs become 51%? Yeah, it's going to happen. But in a democratic society, 51% doesn't control everything. He says, you're worried that we will do to you what you did to us. 51% in any democratic society is only one part of the story. A democratic society respects and guarantees the rights of the individual and of the minorities in that society. They become stakeholders. You cannot tell African Americans this is a white Christian state. You are zero. You cannot. You cannot. The state has to be theirs as well as yours. They have to be stakeholders. And there has to be a constitutional structure that guarantees their rights. Well, he says, what about security? Security. You see, Zionism has given its answer for security. Its answer is blood and iron. We have to have power. We have to have power 10 times worse than anybody else. We have to do whatever it takes, step on whoever we want, torture, oppress, destroy, ethnically cleanse. After what happened to us, nobody can talk to us. Never again will we allow this to happen to us. Our power is our only guarantee. And that's an attractive argument for many Israelis. They grow up with that argument, that our security requires us to be ultra vigilant. If we lose one battle, we're destroyed. So we have to have F-16s, but that's not enough. We have to have more F-16s and more Iron Dome and more weapons and more of this and more of that. They will never be secure. The other answer, the non-Zionist answer, is that yes, Jews are entitled to security. Never again should this be allowed to happen to Jews, but never again should this be allowed to happen to anybody else. After the Holocaust, many decent Jews decided to become very active in human rights and in international law and in defense of equality and in defense of vulnerable minorities, and they are at the forefront throughout the world and certainly in this country. That is a non-Zionist approach to the issue. But I said, I'll go one step further. I'll give you a couple of benefits. Since you are so wrapped up in your security phobias, how about if we make it as a matter of constitutional law that the defense minister, the head of the army, navy, air force, and nuclear weapons will always be a Jewish person, with an Arab deputy, and every other position in the army will be on the basis of merit. But the head of the police and the Ministry of Interior will always be a Palestinian Arab with a Jewish deputy. We have our own traumas at the hand of the Israeli police and border patrol and internal security organs. We know what it's like. So we address that in a constitutional framework. Not only that, I said I'll do something else. 10% of the defense budget will always go towards providing real security by teaching each group the language and culture and history of the other group and working on joint projects and ameliorating the basis for bitterness and hatred between them. Today, Israel doesn't face a security problem from terrorism. Their problem is this 12-year-old schoolgirl with a pair of scissors in her pocket, and she wants to stab somebody, and she doesn't care who it is. And you don't deal with that without dealing with the basis for injustice that creates bitterness and hatred. Is this possible? I think it's possible. In fact, I think it is inevitable. The idea of a mini Palestinian state is gone, done, dead. It's not gonna happen. but the idea of an apartheid state that exists for the benefit of Jews alone at the expense of non-Jews is also no longer possible. You know, used to be a history major before I got into law. And I tell my Israeli friends and their supporters, your problem is you are an anachronism. You're living in the wrong century. If you came 5 centuries ago, trying to live by principles of 2,000 years ago, maybe okay. In fact, you may be considered progressive. Because 5 centuries ago, it was all right to ethnically cleanse people, to colonize another people, to have settler colonialism and push them out of the way, to have collective punishment. That's not the world we live in today. Today, we live in a world that's governed by international law and human rights. Yes, there are those who violate it, I understand. But sooner or later, they have to be brought to heel. People don't understand how successful international law has been. The last 70 years or so, since 1948, there have been only 4 cases of a country trying to take somebody else's land by force. Iraq tried it in Kuwait. That was told nonsense. You can't do it. Even though Kuwait used to be the 19th governorate, Iraq had needs to have access to the sea and all the good security arguments. Nonsense. International law doesn't allow it. There's also Western Sahara, where Morocco tried to take Western Sahara. And the entire world community said no, until our previous president was bribed into recognizing it. And Israel in East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. Cannot happen, is not allowed, will not be tolerated for long. So here is where we are today. Shall we continue to fight and kill each other in a zero-sum solution where every advance by one side is a loss to the other, where my happiness causes you sadness and your happiness and prosperity causes me anguish and pain? Or can we live together? This is what I have to say, and I think I welcome your questions and answers about it.
We have 2 microphones, so raise your hand and we'll get one of the microphones to you. Please, the emphasis on questions. I know that in here we confuse questions with lectures. So please, you have 1 minute to ask the question, and if not, we'll move to the next person.
Hi, thank you so much. That was incredible. It was incredible to hear that. I was wondering if you had any recommendations for how Jews in the U.S., and especially Jewish students, can help the Palestinian cause and contribute to all the points you were making during your speech.
Yeah, I think Jews in the United States play a pivotal role, especially younger Jews, because they really realize apartheid is wrong and oppressing Palestinians is wrong. What happens in Palestine is of great interest to Jews in this country, also to Muslims, also to Christians. Jerusalem and Palestine is central to all 3 monotheistic faiths. The question is, how can we turn that into a positive rather than a negative? And the one thing we cannot accept is exclusivity. If a Muslim comes and say this is an Islamic waqf, it's only for Muslims, sorry, I can't accept that. And if Christians, well, they don't these days. During the Crusades, they did. If they said this is the sepulcher, the grave of Christ, and we have to kill all the infidels and kick them out, sorry, that doesn't work. Similarly, if Jews say this is the eternal capital of the Jewish people and nobody else, we cannot accept that. Now, it's funny because the other side thinks they can silence you. And they have two tools. One of them is anti-BDS legislation. They say, if you try to stop me, we'll call you anti-Semitic and we'll punish you. And we'll have the state punish you, and we'll have the government punish you, and everybody punishes you. And the second is the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. We will define anti-Semitism to mean really working against Zionism and the State of Israel. The IHRA definition, for those who don't know, it's the International Holocaust Remembrance Act. Actually, the definition on its face looks pretty good. But then it lists about 10 examples of what anti-Semitism is. And 8 of these examples have to do with opposing the policies of the State of Israel. And so they slip that in under the rug, and before you know it, it's part of your student handbook, and you have to spend half of your time defending yourself. I am not being anti-Semitic. And you've seen what it's like in Berkeley. If you're anti-Zionism, you're being anti-Semitic, and this is a Jew-free zone, etc., etc., etc. So it's a battle, and it's an ongoing battle. But it's a battle where we are colleagues and allies and not enemies.
I just was, since what's happened in Ukraine, I viewed what's happening in Palestine a little bit different. The language that we use to describe the resistance is often called militants or terrorists. And I think if the language could be changed to talk about a resistance, that might be helpful.
Yeah.
To shed different light. And also, not that this will happen anytime soon, but if Palestinians or the Arabs were to actually serve in the military alongside Jews.
Yes, I think
yeah.
when the new state comes that doesn't oppress Arabs, that is not just there to defend Jews against non-Jews, yes, I think Arabs should serve in the military or in national service. And if they're like me, a pacifist, they should be excused from military service. But language is really interesting, because when you label something, you basically condemn it. If I'm labeled a terrorist, an anti-Semite, a bigot, a racist, then I have a long haul just to get back to equal status so I can talk to you. And the Ukraine and is a perfect example of that, I think.
Two things. One, I was part of the National Lawyers Guild delegation in 1985, and just want to say how incredible it is they persisted all these years, and I'm very grateful for that. Second thing is for Jewish young people who are interested in supporting Palestinian cause, might be interested in checking the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, which I participated in. And the last thing is a question to you. You mentioned several countries that have taken over land from other countries. Was there an oversight that you left out this, Russia and Ukraine?
I did not intend to leave it out at all.
Okay.
They are definitely the fourth and most significant one. There's Iraq, Kuwait, there's Morocco, Western Sahara, there's Israel with the Golan and East Jerusalem, and there's Russia first with the Crimea and then the Ukraine. Absolutely.
Thank you.
We have somebody here.
Hello, great to hear you, and I've been a friend of Nonviolence International for a long time. Nice to meet you. A lot of what you say, I agree 100% with your comments about the IHRA definition. My question, you make me think a lot about Jeff Halper's book, Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, that came out recently, and I think he's in English the most prominent component of the one democratic state, which is a political platform that people have made. So I'm curious to hear your comments about that effort. Are you in league with that, or
Jeff Halper is a wonderful guy. He's one of a very small number of Israelis who also realize that we need to live together in a single democratic state, and who doesn't only talk about it, he actually works towards it. So yes, Jeff Halper is wonderful. In fact, I really gained a lot of respect for Jeff Halper when he tried to break the siege of Gaza by actually taking a boat and sailing into the Gaza harbor. For those who don't know, Gaza has been under siege for the last 15 years. Nobody can go in or out. No goods can go in or out without Israeli permission. Jeff Halper was brave enough to break the siege and go in.
but he's not the only person working on that effort. But I mean,
He is. I met him about 3 weeks ago in Indiana, where he was still working on these things.
Thank you. When you say that the division of power between the army for Jews and police for the Palestinians, don't you think that this is repeating the Lebanon and Iraq in a way?
Okay, a very good question. The designation of certain positions to one ethnic or religious group has been a problem for Lebanon. You're right. But it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. I also want to show maximum empathy for both sides. You see, the police control what happens inside the country. The army controls what happens outside the country. And so the Zionism says we are afraid of all these hordes of Arabs and Muslims. I think it's nonsense. None of the Arab states is in any way remotely considering attacking Israel. But if that makes them feel good, I'd rather have control over the police internally. Who gets arrested at midnight? Who gets beaten up? Who gets really repressed?
Maybe if we're talking about the regimes, the Arab regimes, not the Arab people.
Yes, that is true. That is true. The Arab world has a lot of problems. One of the things I like about my suggestion is that it also offers a model for the Arab world. I think it makes Palestine an even better country. And I think it makes Israel an even better Jewish country. I don't know if you know that, but Jews today in Israel do not have much religious freedom because they cut a deal with the Zionist movement and the religious parties to give exclusive control over personal status matters to the Orthodox rabbinical courts. In my proposal, there will be religious courts, but there will also be civil courts, so that you are no longer under the thumb of the religious authorities, whether it's Sharia or ecclesiastical or rabbinical courts. It is a bit idealistic, I grant you. But we need to have a vision that we can work towards. It's not enough to have a common enemy that we can hate and hate upon. We need to have something that we believe in that makes life better for us and for our children and grandchildren.
I just wanted actually maybe to ask the question. It seems that there's a symmetry that you're creating between the Palestinian side and the Zionist side. And in that, it just...
No.
So how do you
No,
know
no,
that
no,
there
no.
is completely lack of symmetry in
there is-
positionality?
There is an absolute lack of symmetry, and in the book I say that very clearly. There is no symmetry, historical or moral or positional, between Palestinian Arab nationalists who are in the land and of the land, and between those who are trying to create something new by coming from all over the world. Basically with a settler colonial framework of mind. There is no symmetry between the two. In the book I make it clear, and if I didn't, I hereby state it categorically. There is no symmetry between the two.
And maybe
But there
follow-
is a need for each side to understand the other.
Now, follow up question on, like in the law school in here, there is an assumption that is not assumption, but actually a taught position that Israel does not engage in torture. And that this is whenever in a classroom or a lecture, that this is emphasized that Israel has the highest moral standard in its conduct. And I know we have the research going back from the London Times from 1987, because I read the report. So what is the status of Israel court and the situation of the Palestinians as it relates to torture, especially in this law school where, you know, we have written the executive memos to authorize George Bush's torture during the war on terrorism. So what is the situation with torture specifically?
Okay, at Al-Haq, we worked very hard on the issue of torture. In fact, for 5 years, we refused to use the word torture, even though we knew it was taking place, because we couldn't prove it. Most of the torture was taking place in secret during periods of interrogation when the victim was isolated from their lawyer, from other prisoners, from their family. They were allowed to be seen by the Red Cross. And for many years, Israel says, but the Red Cross can see them. Yes, they can see them, but they cannot publish their reports. So after over 5 years, when we built the case block by block, the ICJ, International Commission of Jurists, jointly with Al-Haq, issued their report on torture. And we showed not only that it happens and that it is practiced, but that it is systematic, that it is part of how they obtain information and confessions. The big breakthrough came with the Bus 300 incident, when a Palestinian was pictured being led out of a bus, which he had hijacked with a toy gun, in good health, and later turned out dead. And the Israelis said, we didn't torture him. And there was a commission report by Israel where they were really wrestling with the moral dilemma. The dilemma was this: the interrogators felt they needed to torture this person to get the information. Otherwise, he would have to be released because he didn't have evidence. But if they told the Israeli judge that this is how we obtained the information, he'll throw that confession out. So the court said, instead of saying don't do torture anymore, said no, don't lie to us anymore. We authorize you to use moderate physical pressure and psychological pressure, and we will list in a secret appendix all the different methods that are allowed, that are kosher for you to use. Today, it is well known among Israeli and Palestinian and international groups that torture is not only practiced, but that it is practiced systematically in Israeli courts. Sorry. Case closed.
Missing from your program, something I think was very important in the case of South Africa, which is the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Along those lines, since the advent of the Zionist movement, the attempt to liquidate Palestinians physically have been very strong, starting with poisoning well, assassinating leaders, assassinating journalists, intentionally assassinating medics in Gaza, assassinating the demonstration in the March of January, etc. In your talk, you alluded to the existence of an assassination doctrine in the army. Can you elaborate more on that, please?
Okay. I want to say that Truth and Reconciliation Commissions occur after the conflict is over. We are still in the midst of the conflict. Israel will not be able to tolerate or accept the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It may be forced to deal with some harsh facts which have been documented beyond a reasonable doubt. Everybody now has a phone and they take pictures and take videos. And there are journalists who still bravely go around and take pictures. But we cannot have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission yet. In the future, maybe we will. Right now, the problem is there are those Israelis who think they don't need to make peace. They can get away with it. They can manage this conflict. They can do whatever they want, and the United States will protect them, will provide them with a diplomatic umbrella through the veto at the United Nations Security Council and through its pressure on other international organizations not to hold them accountable. And that is the case today. There's no question about it. I submit to you that will not be the case forever. Forever is a long time, long time.
And the assassination doctrine?
Assassination doctrine, I mentioned the name of the book there, Rise Up and Kill First, if you are interested in it. It's part of the Israeli army doctrine, to go after important individuals and simply kill them, assassinate them, whether they are nuclear scientists or munitions specialists, or whether they are commanders in the field. It started with ticking time bomb. We will go after somebody who's a ticking time bomb in order not to allow him to blow up and kill people. But then it started ticking time bomb, as well as those who send it, as well as their family members, as well as collateral damage for those in the general area where it's happening. And it's just a slippery slope. It's very well documented in that book, plenty of footnotes, horrible reading. I don't recommend it before you go to sleep.
Hi, Fatima from South Africa. I sit here drawing as a child that's grown up in apartheid and seeing the transition and bearing witness in a way to the truth and beauty reconciliation commissions. The feelings of kind of the term that comes to mind is sellout. And I was wanting to find out as you go across engaging with Palestinians and with Israelis, whether any of that type of language or sentiment emerges as you present these ideas.
Oh, it does. Palestinian people, unfortunately, are the same as every other people. There are those who are traitors and sellouts. There are those who feel desperate and they need the permits. You see, Israel operates a permit-based regime. You need a permit for everything. You need a permit to build a house. You need a permit to travel. You need a permit to go to a hospital. You need a permit to import, to export. Almost everything that you would want to do requires a permit. And if you have a member of your family who is sick and you need to go to hospital in Jerusalem, you cannot go without getting a permit from the Israelis. And when you go to get the permit, the officer will tell you, you help me, I help you. You scratch my back, I scratch your back.
If I could just maybe follow up, I didn't mean sell out in that way. I really meant it in the sense of selling out the cause. And selling out the cause of justice as you present these ideas. So I'm wondering about the appetite of the responses of people as you present this vision, whether people engage with it in a way that says, this is not the vision that we want. It's a sellout, it's cop out.
Well, there are many people who are punch drunk. They are so tired. They've tried and tried and tried and they can't do anything and they give up. Many people thought that when the Palestinians accepted the two-state solution back in 1968, 69, they made a mistake, that it was a sellout. And as I said, as a person who was involved in the process, I was the head of the legal committee, which was involved in setting up the Oslo Agreement. We thought it was going to create a Palestinian state. We thought it was going to stop the settlements. We thought it was going to give us some measures of relative justice, if not absolute justice. But it didn't. And then it became clear that it was a sellout, as you say.
I'm going to come from a different direction. Last time I talked about changing words or resistance. But how do you visualize a movement in Palestine to where they say, let's all become Israel, and let's all coexist without exclusivity? So how do you see that unfolding? Is there any beginning of that kind of movement there?
That cannot happen because Israel controls all entry, all travel, or movement between the different parties. Right now, Israel has fragmented the Palestinian population. There are those in Gaza who are in an open-air prison. They cannot go to meet their relatives across the borders in Jerusalem or in Bethlehem or in Nablus or Jenin, much less go into Israel and say, we want to be like you. There are those who are in East Jerusalem like myself. We are residents but not citizens. We have been granted this funny, unique status, which is very vulnerable. If we leave Jerusalem, we could lose our status and become stateless. It needs to be our center of our life and activity. There are those who are in the West Bank. And in the West Bank, they can't move between and among the areas of the West Bank because the Israelis either physically stop you or place cement blocks at the entrance of your village, etc., etc. And then there are those who are in the diaspora, who are refugees outside. So it's not a question of do we want, can we ask? I think for most Palestinians, the first ask would be, give us freedom of movement. Never mind political rights. Just let me travel around in Palestine. Let me visit Hebron, and let me visit Haifa, let me visit my relatives in Gaza, and let them come and visit me. That by itself is such a huge burden and cause of suffering. So it's not a question of Palestinians deciding to ask for equality. It's that we are under a control regime, a matrix of control. And that needs to be dismantled. That needs to be dismantled entirely.
How about the passive countries like Egypt and Jordan? Do you think that they should put more pressure on Israel as we move forward, or that they should continue just to play the same role that they have?
Well, Egypt and Jordan have not done well by the Palestinian people. The Arab world generally has not done well by the Palestinian people. Or let's put it more accurately, the Arab leaders, all of them, undemocratic, unelected, unrepresented people, have not done well by the Palestinian people. The population is very supportive, yes, but the governments have not helped us very much at all. They have played the game. They have played the game. And maybe some of our own leaders have also contributed to playing that game. And my book is a cry that says that game no longer operates. That paradigm has collapsed, has shifted. We must think in new terms. We must think out of the box. We must create something new. We cannot continue as we have been.
Will Israel attempt to close Al-Haq and other organizations have not accomplished their goal? I mean, the organization is still functioning, their funds are restored. So what do you think is Israel's next move?
Well, I don't know. Israel is in a dilemma. On the one hand, it wants to control the Palestinian people. On the other hand, the Palestinian people don't want to be controlled. So it has to act more and more aggressively, more and more right-wing, more and more fascistically. But when it does that, number one, people will rise up. And number two, the world will look at it and says, this is not a democratic country. This is clearly an oppressive apartheid regime. So Israel always has to play that, trying to balance the two. And what we've seen the last 2 weeks is that balance is breaking down. They need to arrest younger and younger children, more and more of them. They need to beat up people more. They need to put more closures on people. And then some crazy guy comes and says, you know, I'm a martyr. I want to kill and be killed. And gets a lot of support from the people because they want something done. They do not accept the ongoing oppression. They want to resist. And we have many different ways of resisting. Unfortunately, the world doesn't care unless we do something violent. My brother, who's a journalist, used to say, if it bleeds, it leads.
Will they will bring other charges? Will they attack you personally? Will they go after your family? I mean, what's the biggest?
They might. And I am pleased that at Al-Haq anyway, the staff, especially the field staff, who have to go out in the different villages and collect the affidavits, have been very clear. We are willing to continue to work And if they arrest us, so be it. We are part of these people, and we will not be intimidated. See, this is the problem with Israel. It's just, this crazy people haven't got the memo. They don't know that they've been defeated. They don't know that we have crushed them and can crush them thoroughly. And yet they're acting as if they're not defeated. It's a problem for Israel.
First, I'd like to begin by saying using the term crazy for people who are fighting occupation is a derogatory.
Sorry,
especially since I asked this question with the heavy presence of the martyrs who have been killed in the past week alone, and the 27 Palestinians who have been killed in the past few weeks.
Okay, hold it. I apologize. I did not mean, what I meant was in the strategic plan for Palestinian resistance.
Yes.
Their acts were not well.
My question is, given what Sister Fatima just asked about the narrative of potential sellout of a cause, how is your ideals and your idea fit in with the Palestinian resistance movement now in Palestine?
Okay. It's a new idea, and it's a painful idea. And I'm sure there will be people who do not like it. But remember, the idea of a single secular state in all of Palestine used to be the original idea. That's what we believed in. That's what the PLO believed in. And instead they were silenced. Don't you dare talk about a secular democratic state. Secular democratic state means you don't accept the Jewish state, means you want to destroy Israel. We were silenced. The PLO was silenced. Yasser Arafat was silenced. We were told the minute you talk one state, there's nothing to talk about. It's a non-starter. Go home. There's nothing to talk about. We only talk about two states. Okay? We talked about two states, and now we're not getting two states. So we're actually reviving an idea that used to be from the beginning, the idea of the PLO and the Palestinian National Movement. A secular democratic state, secular, not non-religious, secular in the sense of non-sectarian. Democratic movement has a long history in Palestinian resistance and struggle. One of my best friends, when I gave him the book and we discussed it, he told me, I cannot accept this. I said, why? He said, it's so hard to get them to accept a two-state solution in 22% of Palestine. Now you want them to accept a state in all of Palestine? It's harder. It's a higher form of resistance than I am willing to be involved in right now. He told me that very openly. So I'm not saying that this is the only idea. And I'm not saying maybe even it's the best idea. And I put it out there. It's available, by the way, in Arabic and Hebrew, for people to tell me how we can improve it, and for people to critique it and tell me this doesn't work. We cannot do it. But then you have to tell me what does work. And I don't see anything else being suggested by other people that will be able to get rid of this powerful nightmare, caboose, which is lying on our chest and on our bodies that we cannot get rid of, which is the Zionist settlement of Palestine. It's a colonial settlement regime. We need to get rid of it. And how do we do that? I don't know. This is my attempt.
Any more questions?
Okay.
I would just, if you check out onestatecampaign.org,
Yeah.
I think you will see something that's even a little bit more sussed out, you know, and is worked on, and a great piece by Awad Abdel Fattah.
Awad Abdel Fattah.
Israelis and Palestinians working together all.
Can I urge you to try and sign up to get more information? I'm the executive director of FOSNA, Friends of Sabeel. We send out material only once a week. So if you would like to receive our material and to read the book, for those of you who are students, there's a short executive summary of 8 pages at the end. Read that first. And if you don't like it, don't read the rest of the book.
Maybe I want to expand a little bit on some of the questions. We do have a trend that's developing both in the United States and the Arab world of this normalization, where we're talking about, peace and one state solution, but in the background there's this push of normalizing Zionism without decolonization. So I want to make sure that when we're talking about this discussion, that the emphasis on a decolonization of Zionism as a starting point rather than the normalization path. Because we have, again, in the United States, something called Muslim Leadership Initiative that is carried out by the Shalom Hartman Institute. We have the IMJAC, which is a board that's set up to deal with Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, where some of the people who are participating actually are the ones that promote Islamophobia. So I want to make sure that our discussion, at least in the vision, the future, is putting the appropriate
Let me make
parts
it
of that
very clear. I am not in favor of
just
normalization. I think Zionism, by its very nature, is oppressive, is racist, discriminatory against me and my people. And what I'm calling for them is to change and include Palestinian people within their vision for what their state should be. Accept the Palestinian right of return. Now that's a good litmus test. If they are normalizers, they don't accept that.
I think we have a question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't read the book, but I'm excited to. I'm looking forward to reading it. But I wonder if you read Mamdani's book, Neither Settler Nor Native, about the same subject. And the problem, and it seems to me from the conceptualization you presented, again, from the brief conceptualization you presented, is that this vision recreates the problem of having minority. And that's really the core of the problem. The core of the problem is that there is a dominant majority and a ruling over a minority. The other side that sounds to me would be the problem in what you presented is that with the relative success of the TRC in South Africa, it seems to me as a Palestinian, and this step must be, any sort of step in that direction must come after a collective recognition on the part of the powerful party about the injustices committed towards the collectively towards the oppressed minority or the oppressed Palestinians. So, but to what extent are we not recreating in this vision the same problem, making a new minority and looking at the population through the lens of majority minority, drawn up along ethnic lines?
No, you have to read my book because I deal with this particular issue. That minority.
You're saying a Jewish, sectarian. Forgive me, but from what I understood from you, you seem to think that if we get a head of the army to be Jewish and the head of that, with these are practical examples that need to be thought out. But I'm not sure that this is a recipe for a society that leaps beyond sectarianism.
I realize that we have a long way to go to reach that. And frankly, from my perspective, The biggest problem is the huge imbalance of power between us and the other side. In other words, people don't give up their privilege easily. A slaveholder, when you talk to them about equality, they say, well, you're trying to rob me of my property. So those who have privilege and benefit from it don't easily give up their privilege unless they are forced by internal and external forces to give it up, and then only reluctantly, because they see the call for equality as an oppressive claim. You mean I'm the same as him? No, I own him. My point is, you cannot do that anymore. The world has changed, and the world is changing. You can try to do it a little and manage, but eventually you have to deal with equality, and you have to deal with removing that privilege. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be pretty. Right.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on birthright trips.
On what?
Birthright trips where American Jews will go to Israel.
Oh, birthright trips. Yeah, birthright trips are an attempt to manufacture connection between Jewish people and the land of Palestine and Israel, by hook or by crook. And a lot of money goes into it. And for many people, it's a free trip. It's a nice way to meet young people from the other sex. It's a nice way to have fun. And of course, for Palestinians, this is so painful, because we who belong to the land, some of us who are born there, cannot go and pay our own expenses. And here somebody else comes and they can go, and this is mine. This is my birthright. It belongs to me. I have to tell this because precisely because somebody says, are you creating any symmetry? 100 years ago, with all due respect, Jews had nothing in Palestine. There were Jewish people in Palestine, but they were Arabs of the Jewish religion. They ate hummus and danced dabke and spoke Arabic. Next year in Jerusalem, you say that once a year. Well, do you know that Muslims, not once, 5 times every single day, turn to Mecca to pray? Does that mean Saudi Arabia belongs to them and they can go and capture its oil wells and say, I'm a Muslim, this is mine? You cannot do that. But this is what Zionism did. Say, oh, but we have historic claims. What historic claims? 150 years of rule. Do you know how many countries had several 100 years of rule over Palestine in the last 200 years? Italy, the Romans, Greece, Turkey, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt. You can't do that. You can't create out of nothing. But they did. They created something out of nothing. And birthright is an attempt to keep manufacturing that connection. So yeah, there's something very, very problematic, I think, for me. But this is what it is.
I'm just asking about the questions of birthright. Can a Palestinian in UC Berkeley apply to go to the birthright?
No, because a birthright is labeled on being Jewish.
So
that's the whole essence of apartheid.
So birthright is a Palestine free zone trips.
They're working on a Christian Zionist version now. They're developing a Christian Zionist version.
I'm just saying, because you're often, Palestinians are excluded, it is normalized, and we don't think of the exclusion as part of the discussion. So we're always thinking about how birthrights or Israel's security and so on as the norm, and the Palestinians have to fit into that norm. So basically, the question is, birthright is exclusively Jewish-only trips promoted in the United States, including on this campus, which creates a Palestine free zone trips. And it's not seen as an issue or as a problem. So again, in terms of language and who's included and who's excluded, especially at UC Berkeley, especially in the law school, where some of these conversations take place. So you have a whole birthright campaign that says Palestinians are not allowed. And you have flyers all over the campus to promote, across the country, to promote these trips. So we're okay with a Palestine free zone on campus, and it's not even a question, right? Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for your speech. My question is more about the general tactic and vision of the nonviolence movement. If we're taking cues, for example, from the Indian independence movement or the civil rights movement, those were particular nonviolent movements designed to show the brutality that lay behind a civilized facade in order to be able to propel a movement that otherwise was not able to reveal what it actually means. But when the Palestinians are faced with a state that rebels and violence and brutality that does not seek to hide it, but rather displays it openly and cruelly, what exactly is the long-term vision of the nonviolence movement once that brutality is actually exposed and still the world doesn't change?
Well, the issue of violence and non-violence is a very hotly debated issue among Palestinians. The reality is Palestinians have practiced non-violence many, many times throughout their history. But we've also practiced, or at least talked about, armed resistance. In fact, we've glorified armed resistance. When I have my deep discussion, serious discussion, not public discussions like this, some people say, even leaders of Hamas will ask me, can we do both? Can we do both? Because we have the right to use every means possible, including armed struggle. That's the legitimate right. We cannot deny that. The question is it useful? Is it successful? And can we do both, this one and that one? Or do we have to be very pure in our nonviolence in order to achieve the benefits? It's an ongoing discussion, so I'm not going to try and resolve it today. But I am very familiar with the dilemma that you are posing. I cannot tell. In fact, I hate those who are always telling us about nonviolence and not telling the Israelis. If you want nonviolence, talk to the Israelis. They have one of the most militarized societies in the world. So if you want to talk about nonviolence, talk to them.
One question here, last question.
Thank you. I appreciated your presentation very much. And I mean, this is just, it seems to me the starting point to get any part of your plan off the ground is for all the people to see the humanity of the other. And I just wonder, over the years, I've always heard the people are all brothers and sisters or cousins anyway. Why can't we see the humanity? So just a question, now with the ancestry.com type thing where we really can see that we're related, have you noticed that any of that makes even a tiny bit of difference in attitude?
None. I think you get the average Palestinian and he might have more Ashkenazi blood in him than many of these people who are coming from all over the world. You see, Zionism is a doctrine that's based on your ethnicity, which is why we say it's a racist doctrine. And if you accept the idea that Israel should be a Jewish state, then you're talking apartheid. That's all. You're talking apartheid. Yes, of course, I reject apartheid. Yes, of course, I believe in equality. Yes, of course, we are all human beings and we are brothers and sisters and siblings one to another. But when you have an ideology that is based on your Jewishness, and there are political consequences as a result of your Jewishness. You can go there on birthright and settle there and take my home and my land because you're Jewish. That's where we have our problem.
Last one.
The very last.
Very last.
Hello, thank you so much for your speech. My question is, why do you think that Zionism is not going to last, maybe not forever, but not going to last for a long time if the United States is funding and supporting Israel and Palestine? And when we look at, what America did with the genocide, it's lasted 500 plus years. So why do you think Zionism is going to last for as long?
It's a very good question. Why do I think that racism and force and oppression cannot last forever? It's almost a theological question. Because I believe in God and in a just God. But if you don't believe in God, you can believe in history. And history has shown us many regimes that were based on force alone collapsing under their own weight, sometimes at the height of their military might. Apartheid is a perfect example. Until the very end, the South African regime was all-powerful. It could conquer half of Africa easily, could dominate it. It had military resources, was reputed to have an atomic bomb, which they sent to Israel. It had coal, it had uranium, it had many resources. The United States was supporting them, and England, until close to the very end. And yet people in this country rose up, demanded an end to apartheid, boycotted, demonstrated, went out in the street, challenged the power, did divestment, shareholders meetings to divest from South Africa, and in the end succeeded.
But they won't do it for Israel.
Why not?
They won't.
Why not? I don't think Israel is or should be exempt from the rules of justice and from the rules of international law and from the rules of decency, common human decency. I don't know if that answers your question. It's a tough question. It's a tough question, but I believe, and that's why I resist. And the Palestinian people believe, and that's why they resist. Even though it doesn't look very hopeful in the short term. We're not very optimistic, but we are still full of hope. We have not been defeated. We have not been crushed. We'll continue to resist. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Just wanted maybe to conclude conclude with just a comment that we might have disagreement, comments, and discussions about the way forward and what to do after. But I think it's very critical for us to focus on ending apartheid and ending settler colonialism in Palestine. So even if you have a different opinion about what's going to happen down the line in the future, the work for today is still need to happen today. So I want you to double your effort on the PDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanction. Palestinians inside Palestine have called for boycotting Zara because of their enlightenment. I don't shop there, so but if you shop there and you happen to be connected, there's a call for boycotting Zara, and I know they're all over the place to make sure to honor some of their call, and also to support some of the efforts here at the law school in relation to the assault on the SJP here at the law school and what is being a whole process of demonization that is occurring. So please connect with the law school, SJP, MSA, and others who are really been at the focal point of national debate. So we'll have further discussions, but the work for Free Palestine continues unabated until we end settler colonialism as we speak. And we should not apologize nor be therapists for those who will continue to insist on supporting settler colonialism. I am never a therapist for those who continue to support oppression. So thank you. And